With the DPRK test of a sixth nuclear device, tensions on the Korean Peninsula are escalating. What's next for a situation that seems to be getting worse? US forces in Korea will soon install the 4 remaining THAAD missile defense launchers at their new southern base. How will China and Russia react to the continued deployment of THAAD? How can China and South Korea get back to better relations? The UN Security Council has adopted numerous sanctions against the DPRK, and the US said on Monday it would introduce a new UN resolution on tougher sanctions. But can diplomacy provide an alternative? During the BRICS summit, Chinese President Xi Jinping and his Russian counterpart Vladimir Putin vowed to deal appropriately with the latest nuclear test conducted by the DPRK and stick to the goal of denuclearization on the Korean Peninsula. What are the ongoing challenges for this process?
Well, in the 6th and most powerful nuclear test yet, the DPRK has claimed to have exploded a hydrogen bomb. Deployment of the THAAD anti-missile system in South Korea will soon be completed, and the US and ROK will continue to conduct joint live-fire drills as well as a simulated strike on the DPRK nuclear targets. So obviously tensions on the divided Korean Peninsula continue to rise, where solutions are being proposed and which are the mostly likely to happen. And to talk about these and more, I'm happy to be joined in the studio by Zhao Tong, fellow Carnegie Tsinghua Center for Global Policy Researcher, and Mr. N.R. Tongan, our current affairs commentator. We also talked to Jing-Ho Kim, professor at Dankook University, and Dr. J.E. Hall, associate fellow, Asia Program, Royal Institute of International Affairs, Chatham House in London, through satellite. And this is our topic. This is Dialogue. I'm Zhou Yue. So after the DPRK's successful test of what they call the hydrogen bomb, China expressed strong condemnation and obviously opposition to the nuclear test. But it is still usual statement saying this is not in line with peace and security. Should China come up with tougher words and even stronger actions, maybe, Mr. Zhao?
Well, I think China this time is indeed assigning a greater share of the responsibility to North Korea. The nuclear test, especially the detonation of the hydrogen bomb, is a very grave provocation by North Korea. However, I think China also...
And you believe it is a hydrogen bomb?
I think according to the data available by now, it looks like more likely a real hydrogen bomb, a 2-stage thermonuclear weapon. And also I think China understands that North Korea and the United States really work under opposite logics. Putting pressure on either of them doesn't really help resolve their disagreements.
So what do you think China should do? It seems China is under a lot of pressure because tougher sanctions, meaning China will do most of it because China providing the lifeline to Pyongyang. So do you think cut oil supply might be an option on China's table, or is still just out of the question?
I doubt that's a viable option, because by cutting off North Korea's economic lifeline and pushing the North Korean government into a corner will likely just encourage North Korea to be even more militarily provocative, given that their control is being threatened. They have nothing more to lose. I don't think that helps to reduce the tensions.
So, and what do you think China's response should be? It seems now China hasn't done anything yet, but a lot of pressure has been mounting.
Well, one of the things China needs to do is kind of combat this narrative that this is all somehow China's fault, that China has been trying to help North Korea become a nuclear power. This is quite the opposite. China does not want North Korea to have a nuclear power. They do not want a nuclear arms race throughout Asia. This is not within any kind of semblance of an aim for China. So it's ridiculous. The concern here is that the U.S., Donald Trump, has decided to make it all about China by declaring, he says, well, you know, What is China doing?
Because his
They have the
rationale
trade.
is that only sanctions, tougher sanctions, can work to persuade North
Work
Korea
what?
to drop its nuclear
Yeah, but
programs.
that's absolutely ridiculous.
And
I mean,
both China and Russia think that sanctions wouldn't work.
they haven't worked. How long have they been under sanctions? If the sanctions were going to work, they would have worked by now. Quite frankly, they have said themselves, we under no circumstances will give up our nuclear option. It's the only way to secure ourselves. Now, I think the issue is security. They want some sort of ironclad guarantee that the sovereignty of the North will be maintained, that there will be no attack on them. The question is, how can this be done? They will not come. The U.S. will not come to the table until they give up their nuclear arms. They say, without our nuclear arms, we have no leverage. We will not ever give them up.
But do you think the Trump administration is now seriously considering either talking to North Koreans or having a military strike?
Okay, well, you get mixed messages depending on whether Tillerson at the State Department is talking or Donald Trump tweeting.
But they are considering both.
Well, obviously, from a political perspective, all right, Trump came in and said he's a strong man, that he can handle North Korea, that he'll, either have a hamburger with the guy or he'll bomb him back to this, Stone Age type of attitude. So he cannot afford to look weak on this particular issue. His core base is looking at him and expecting him to, quote, do something. I don't know if you saw that that tape where they went around and asked people what they should do.
But the only thing that he seems to have done is to ask China to do more.
Well, yes, he's trying to set up a situation where, to quote, whatever happens, it's China's fault. All right, China didn't do enough to do this, China didn't do enough to do that. China's concerns, as you pointed out, are quite valid. The amount of trade that North Korea is doing has been decreasing. But the issue isn't whether somebody in North Korea buys a sweater from China. The issue is how are they getting their money. Now, if you go to where North Korea is doing it, they have set up little businesses around the world. They basically will provide very, very cheap labor, and they collect the money for it. They have restaurants, bars, all sorts of things, including in India.
So do you think, John Hong, that the Chinese side has communicated this message to the Americans enough, that even if we push Pyongyang to the corner, even if there's the toughest sanctions, they won't drop the nuclear programs? Only by having Americans and North Koreans sit down and talk, we can probably solve this.
I think China is trying to explaining that logic to the United States. Look, the U.S. doesn't have a good strategy in case North Korea is cornered and becoming even more provocative. How do you deal with that situation? Apparently, the United States haven't thought through those questions. It is only reacting intuitively to pressure with more pressure. Certainly, I think, hopefully, more direct discussion with the United States could talk more sense into Mr. Trump, but we don't know. There are deep psychological barriers for Mr. Trump to change his thinking.
First off, I just want to throw in there, this is not a misunderstanding by the U.S., all right?
You think there's a deliberate strategy?
This is very deliberate. Everybody knows that there are no safe outs. I mean, you had Steve Bannon saying, look, South Korea is their hostage. You're playing with millions, potentially, of South Korean lives if this thing, if we actually went there and did something. So Trump is trying to paint this purely as it's China's problem. China has to solve it. If they don't solve it, whatever happens, it's not our fault. He's trying to avoid any kind of complicity in whatever is to follow.
But he understands that China would never cut oil supply to Pyongyang because that will cripple that country.
They understand.
And put a humanitarian crisis on the Korean Peninsula.
They understand that this could push a regime change that would have a bloody civil war, and unfortunately in this one they would have nuclear weapons at their disposal. You don't know who gets in and what happens. The flood of refugees is obviously a big issue for China. I mean, we see what happened in Syria, we've seen what happened in Iraq and Afghanistan, and the kind of situations that happen when you try to destabilize a country from the outside. So this is China's concern. But at some point, China has to come and say, look, what are we proposing? What can we do that's out of the box? Continue on the same line isn't working. Right? There has to be some way in which perhaps Russia and China say to North Korea, we guarantee your existence, all right, but you must, and that is not up for things. Get rid of your
But you have to
nuclear.
have kind of a friendly gesture to start everything. What about the double freeze program? It seems the Americans are in no mood to accept the double freeze because it sounds like kowtowing to an outlaw state like Pyongyang.
Right. I mean, there was recent revelation that the past May, during the Track 1.5 meetings between former American officials and incumbent North Korean officials, North Korea again proposed to suspend their nuclear missile tests in return for the suspension of the joint military exercises. And that proposal was again declined by the United States. So I do think the inflexibility on the part of the United States to consider the option of modifying or even scaling down their joint exercises is the biggest barrier.
But the picture is different now because North Korea has already successfully tested ICBM, and now it has another round of nuclear tests. It can probably harm the United States.
That's the North Korean logic. Their perception is the reason why Americans don't want to talk is they have not been convinced about North Korean capabilities. So North Korea has to more and better demonstrate their capabilities. That's why we are seeing more ICBM and even nuclear tests.
But that is a dead-end road. The population of the United States, Democrat or Republican, the main body of them would be quite happily support any kind of preemptive strike, given that North Korea is proven to have a nuclear capability and also a delivery system. This is not something. This is something that is universally felt. I mean, North Korea has been spewing venom against anti-Americans, saying that they would attack America. That there would be things. They've had videos on TV showing mushroom clouds over
But you think
Washington.
That's
Well, no. The U.S. will do this. This is the problem. You have two trains speeding head-on at each other, and does not seem to be a switchman.
But it seems they're practicing brinksmanship. North Korea doesn't really want to strike the United States. That means suicide for Pyongyang.
Yes, but the way that they're going about it is not politically acceptable to the American people. The idea that they would have a nuclear bomb and missile delivery system is in the American minds justification for going in and doing a preemptive strike.
Okay, now we have Mr. Kim on the line. Mr. Kim, the South Korean President Moon Jae-in has talked with Russian President Vladimir Putin in Vladivostok. It seems that South Korea has some different opinions with the Trump administration on how to deal with this, because Trump called South Korea's new president's policy as appeasement towards the North. What is South Korea's calculation after the testing of nuclear bomb, the new nuclear bomb test in Pyongyang?
Okay, I think there is not difference between the point of Korean government and American government. The main point, we understand that North Korea also wanted to talk with Korea. The problem is that this is not on time. So President Moon Jae-in now is putting strong sanctions on North Korea. But Moon Jae-in thinks if North Korea gives the answer to the nuclear issues, he will already be willing to be communications with North Korea. It is only natural that President Moon Jae-in enforced the natural security against North Korea's recent provocations. But nowadays, in Korean society, some people want to cooperate with the United States and give North Korea hard sanctions.
And there is another thing that is more worrying, especially for China, that South Korea is putting more anti-missile launchers, the THAAD system in South Korea, and more importantly, even the opposition parties considering bringing back tactical nuclear weapons to South Korea. How realistic will that be?
Yeah, but we already talked about that issues, but we cannot bring in nuclear weapons to Korea. Because if we bring nuclear weapons into Korea, there is some happens to the power balance among Northeast countries. Looks like we, for example, Japan also wanted to do that. And the other country, perhaps we cannot say it is correct or not. Perhaps Taiwan also want to do that. So we're very concerned about the power balance in Northeast Asia. So we wanted to do some strong sanction to North Korea.
So
we also hope China also join with our sanction together.
And you think that President Moon Jae-in also aware of this?
Yeah. Moon Jae-in also don't want to bring any nuclear weapons into Korean Peninsula.
All right. Thank you, Professor Kim. We'll take a short break, and I'm watching Dialogue here on CGTN. We'll be right back. Don't go away. Might be consequences all over Northeast Asia, because there are talks in South Korea about bringing back technical nuclear weapons. Maybe Japan is even considering that, because nobody can solve the issue of North Korea's nuclear program. Is that possible? There's going to be an arms race, a nuclear arms race in Northeast Asia?
Well, in terms of nuclear arms race, I think it's less likely to happen compared with conventional arms race. Even though there is increasingly popular support both in South Korea and Japan about pursuing their own nuclear capabilities, I think the cool-headed officials still very much oppose the idea because that will bring about huge political, diplomatic, economic consequences for their countries. So I don't think it's likely that either of these countries will seriously pursue nuclear weapons. That said...
And of course, that's the last thing China wants to see.
Absolutely, that will greatly undermine China's security environment. With that said, I think both countries, Japan and South Korea, will invest much more in their conventional military capabilities, including offensive and defensive capabilities. And in that sense, we will see a much greater level of arms race. And those deployments will affect China, Russia, and these countries will be bound to respond very strongly. So I'm very concerned about the major powers dynamics going forward.
Okay, now let's bring in some European perspective. We're now joined by Dr. J.E. Hall, Associate Fellow, Asia Program, Royal Institute of International Affairs. So Mr. Hall, you are a European, so you must be better cool-headed in this. What do you think the international community should respond to DPRK's recent hydrogen bomb test? And should the Europeans do anything?
I'm always a bit worried about the term international community. It's a useful shorthand, but I'm not quite sure for what. There's many countries in the world who take very little interest in these vast, important issues such as the nuclear question on the Korean Peninsula. And they're not united against North Korea, whatever.
But there is the possibility of North Korea selling nuclear weapons to the rest of the world. That should worry
are ever going to get what they want, which is total security. The Korean Peninsula has seen one major war in the last 60 years. It's left a divided peninsula. It's left two hostile countries facing each other. Until recently, the United States could feel that it was never going to come under likely attack, although I remember very well the Cold War and the sense that there might be a nuclear war. I remember I was at university in 1962 when the Cuban Missile Crisis took place, and we all retreated to the basement just in case. Well, that passed. But again,
and do you believe now
the always hoped
North Korean nuclear crisis is on par with the Cuban crisis?
No, I don't. But I think it has the potential to become a similar sort of crisis. Although your other colleagues there indicated that they thought that North Korea now had the ability to strike the United States, I think one has to have a few caveats on that. We've seen they can fire rockets and they can fire them considerable distance. They claim that they have both a nuclear device and one that is small enough to go onto one of those rockets, one of those missiles. There's no real evidence that that is so, or that they can actually accurately deliver a rocket. You could fire something in the direction of the United States that might never get there, or might get there but not where it was intended to do. So I think one has to be hold back a bit from making assumptions about how efficient North Korea is at what it claims to be doing. It's very good at claims. This is not the first time it's claimed to have a hydrogen bomb. It's certainly not the first time it's claimed to be able to hit the United States and destroy targeted American cities. There's no evidence for either.
But obviously,
really.
this is the intention of Pyongyang, and it is running in that direction fast. If that is the case, it will be too late to make any preparations.
Well, that leads you back to what you do about it, doesn't it? And what you do about it, I tend to agree with those who say, well, the military option is both dangerous and uncertain. It's certainly dangerous in terms of the numbers of people who might be killed, the economic destruction in East Asia, and therefore worldwide, given the role of East Asia in world economic matters. But also, the North Koreans, as I know, and as most people know, are past masters at hiding material, hiding stuff underground. And though we know some North Korean military sites, nuclear sites, I don't think we know them all by any means. And so a surgical strike, or call it whatever you like, would not guarantee that there wasn't still the possibility of some form of North Korean retaliation. And I think that is much more likely to be aimed at North Korea's near neighbors, Japan and South Korea, than it is to be at the United States.
So if, let's come back to our studio discussion. What is the DPRK's calculation at this moment? It has tested ICBM, it has tested another hydrogen bomb. It seems its aim is to bring attention to its problem, but what exactly it is getting at?
I think, theoretically, North Korea doesn't need to have a full-blown nuclear missile capability. Its nuclear missiles don't need to be 100% reliable to constitute a credible nuclear deterrence. As the professor from London just said, I don't think North Korea's enemy, the United States, can count on North Korean missiles won't work. They will treat the threat very seriously. In that sense, even a rudimentary nuclear capability will be enough for North Korea. But now we see North Korea continuing on with more advanced nuclear bombs, thermonuclear weapon, and much longer range ICBMs.
So what is North Korea getting at? Why is it developing such capabilities?
I think one important reason is the U.S. has declined to talk with North Korea.
So you're saying that they're trying to get the Americans to talk to them?
Right, about freezing their capability. Therefore, North Korea wants to demonstrate that they indeed have already obtained a very capable missile and nuclear program. There's no way the U.S. can force them to give up. That's their way of making the United States face the reality and come to the negotiating table, not to talk about North Korea giving up their existing capabilities, but hopefully preventing the capabilities from further
But this is something
improving.
the Americans won't accept a negotiator partner as a nuclear power such as DPRK.
No, absolutely not. You have two children on the playground, and
But there's no other options. Now, North Korea is a nuclear nation.
And as I'll reiterate my point. From the U.S. perspective, there will be no nuclear mutual assured destruction threat from North Korea. There will be some sort of action. It will probably cause a tremendous amount of devastation. But what you see here is Donald Trump setting it up to be China's fault. We only did what we had to because we were forced to. This is the narrative that I'm most worried about.
And do you think the rest of the world still believe that the Americas can faulting China for the mishandling of the nuclear issue on the Korean Peninsula?
No, and to the contrary, China is taking increasingly higher price for imposing pressure on North Korea. As a result, China is being increasingly threatened by North Korea. So China risks turning the North Korea-China relationship into an adversarial relationship and adding one more nuclear enemy on China's doorstep.
And a deteriorating relations with South Korea is also another cost.
Yeah, but this is exactly what North Korea is trying to do. They want to isolate China as much as possible so that China has no choice but to somehow remain independent on this issue.
So, Mr. Kim, it seems that Pyongyang is trying to place a wedge between all the powers, China and South Korea, China and the United States. What is South Korea's thinking of this? It seems we've lost Mr. Kim. If that is the strategy of Pyongyang, what should be China and South Korea's response?
Well, I don't know that buying more missiles and toys from the United States is going to calm this thing down. But from a populist point of view, if you're the president of a country and you're being threatened with nuclear destruction and you do not act to defend it, you will be quickly not president. You could have a coup, I mean, if people really felt it. So Moon is under tremendous pressure. He tried to open up the door. He tried to say, look, let's have negotiations. He was flatly refused. North Korea just says, you're a stooge of the United States. We want one-on-one party talks with the U.S. The U.S. is unwilling to do it.
But North Korea cannot expect a better partner from South Korea than Mr. Moon.
They don't care. They see this issue is between young Kim thinks that he has to talk directly to Donald Trump. Donald Trump is not willing to talk to him.
So what is going to happen? Donald Trump and his administration, it seems, in no mood of talking to Pyongyang. His UN chief, Ms. Haley, said that simply North Korea is begging for war.
Yes, if we look at the history, there has been no precedent in which a country that already obtained nuclear weapons could be forced, could be coerced into denuclearization. I think sooner or later, people have to come to face the reality that North Korea won this competition. They beat us, we failed to prevent them from getting there. Actually, if we look at the U.S. position, their positions are being softened over time. Originally, the U.S. position is we'll never talk to the North Koreans unless North Korea takes substantive steps to roll back their capabilities. And later on,
Tillerson once said that several weeks ago.
And later on, the position became, okay, North Korea, you need only to commit to the goal of denuclearization. And the most recent position is, okay, North Korea, as long as you stop nuclear and missile tests for a while, maybe we can talk. So North Korea is actually getting there. It's successful in lowering the American preconditions for talks. So hopefully...
And raising the bar for its own negotiations. That seems to be a winning strategy for Pyongyang. And
it's a losing strategy for China.
And the rest of the world has to come up with something to counter this.
But if North Korea has nuclear weapons, it's only a matter of time before Japan and South Korea follow. They have all the technology to do it.
All right, we're running out of time. Thank you very much, Mr. Zhao. Thank you, NR. And you've been watching Dialogue here on CGTN. I'm Joe in Beijing. Thanks for watching. Goodbye.